Everyone, good morning.
Good day, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting shortly. And as usual, we keep our mics and our videos off. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate the time that you've taken to be with us. If we can just give it a few more minutes for people to join in and we can get started. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Looks like colleagues got disconnected. I'm not sure how much of the introduction did you hear from my side, but welcome everyone. Welcome to our session. And this morning we are talking anything and everything around the logistics industry, transportation sector. We are continuing with our conversations around tracking. So tell me who you are, colleagues. We have a chat box. Tell me who you are, which organization are you coming from? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you in business? Are you a professional that is hoping to grow within logistics? We have a very, very interesting discussion this morning. So guys, I want to hear what you are expecting this morning from my discussion with Mr. Richard Durand, whom I will be introducing in the next few seconds. We are live on Zoom, we are live on LinkedIn, we are live on Facebook. So if you are out there, please share this dialogue with just about anyone that will benefit from it. Tell me, guys, where are you coming from? We have a chat box there. I want to hear what you are expecting from the conversation this morning. Like I said, my name is Lebule Zwalo. I am the supply chain coach. I am the director of Sync Point, and through our whisker with our advocacy in the transport sector, we are continuing with our conversation. So the conversation today is around the movement of dangerous goods. So I'm very excited, guys, because I have someone who's an expert in the industry who is joining us this morning, Mr. Richard Durand. I would really want to introduce him. Richard, if you can just pop up your face so that everyone can see you. I will tell you who Richard Durand is. He's a consultant in the road transport industry, specifically on dangerous goods and handling. So he's accountable for Squash. If most of you who are already in the transport sector, you understand the requirement of Squash Africa, the safety quality assessment for sustainability, because it's one of the requirements in the industry. So he's an auditor to ensure that there is compliance for the truck operators. He is accountable and forms part of conducting training on Squash and also RTMS. You know RTMS, colleagues? I hope you do know that. Let me tell you, he has abundance of experience in the industry, close to 30 years of road transport and logistics management and health and safety experience and training, guys. So he's a consultant with RFA, our Road Freight Association, specifically on the dangerous goods by road. He's a chairperson of RFA, specifically on the group that focuses on dangerous goods, colleagues. So we have an expert that understands the movement of dangerous good, hazardous products that we are moving out there. I know most of you guys are probably entrepreneurs, you're already in business, and you want to know exactly what is happening. I've heard a lot of dialogues with yourself, and Richard, I will give you a chance just to now start chatting to everyone that is logging in. A special welcome to everyone who's on LinkedIn, who's on Facebook, and who has logged in via Zoom. Richard, we have a massive followership for everyone that's professionals. They really want to move from one industry to another. We have entrepreneurs that we have been liaising with for a while, and we've been coaching and mentoring them. I remember we asked this discussion as to the audience that we have. Who are these people? Do they understand the transport sector as well? And I indicated to you that yes, we are continuing with the conversation, and today's conversation is one of those that's very critical, because most of these entrepreneurs or professionals wants to understand the movement of dangerous goods through the tankers. So our discussion this morning, colleagues, is really around dangerous goods, is the introduction into that movement of dangerous goods. And Richard will be joining us for various sessions, like I've always promised, that speaks to movement of different types of commodities. And today is a special one where he is doing an introduction specifically on that. So Richard, this is your platform. We're going to have a conversation, guys, and I am encouraging you to be able to ask the questions. I will be popping a lot of questions to Richard as well. So please, anything that you want to know around this topic, please send in your notes, send through your questions. Thank you, Richard. A special welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. I think you can kick off with the conversation. Let's get everyone to liaise with us. I can see there's a lot of people now that are putting some comments. Guys, I'm encouraging you to send through some comments or questions on the chat box. By the time we finish off with our dialogue, I will give you at least 5 minutes for you guys to now live ask the questions to Richard and myself, which I'm hoping that will be able to help you. So Richard, it's your platform. Let's continue with the conversation. Thank you guys, and a special welcome. I hope that you will enjoy this conversation.
Thank you very much, Lebo, and thank you for the opportunity, and most appreciated. And yeah, thank you for the detailed introduction. And yes, I do have 30 years of experience. I've been consulting back to the industry now for coming on 14 years. And as Lebo said, I'm a squash SKS consultant and auditor. Also do work on RTMS. And what I didn't add to my resume is I also do cyanide audits. Cyanide is a very toxic product that is used in the gold mining industry. So I also do audits on transporters of cyanide to ensure the safe handling and delivery of that particular product. So yes, I have good experience, but I'm learning every day. It's a vast field. We're going to be concentrating more on the road transport, but dangerous goods is also transported by air, it's transported by sea, transported by rail, and in Europe it goes on Europe and in America it goes onto barges. So we're going to concentrate on road, but I will give you a bit of a background as to how it all links together and our relationships with the legislation and the standards in mainly in Europe. That's where our legislation really comes from and adapted for South African circumstances. But I'll go through that with you in the presentation. So I think with that, let's get on with the presentation. Just give me a second to share my screen, and then right, I think that should be sharing. So yes, the topic, transport of dangerous goods. I saw in the I'm going to say the advert that went out, the brief, Lebo made mention of dangerous goods and hazardous products. The formal official name for what a lot of people in the industry in South Africa at least call HazChem is dangerous goods. So the term HazChem, as I say, a lot of people still refer to it as HazChem, comes out of the early days of the legislation in South Africa. It was called the HazChem legislation, and it was managed, let's call it, by the Department of Health. And then about, I can't remember the exact date, about 15 years ago, it then moved across to the Department of Transport and then became known as the Transport of Dangerous Goods under the National Road Traffic Act but we'll go into that detail there. My details are on your screen. My email address, cell phone number, and my, okay, that web address is incorrect. Web address is transcheck.co.za. And so, yeah, if you need to get hold of me, if you need any advice, any guidance, please feel free to contact me. So the definition of dangerous goods. These are goods that are capable of posing a significant risk to health and safety. That's health and safety of persons, health and safety, or to a risk to property, and a risk to the environment during transport, as listed in SANS 10228. I'll go through all the SANS codes a bit later. SANS 10228, SANS stands for South African National Standard. 10228 is the classification of dangerous goods. So if you are unsure whether products that you would like to transport or been offered for transport are dangerous goods or not, you refer back to SANS 10228. And if it's listed in 10228, then it is classified as dangerous goods. So to give you an example, a while ago, was doing a presentation similar to this. And one of the attendees said to me, "Sir, is a truck full of snakes considered dangerous goods?" So I said, "Snakes?" He said, "Yes, if they're moving snakes from the snake park to a game reserve or whatever." So I said, "No, they're actually not dangerous, not classed as dangerous goods, because they're not listed in SANS 10228. So it doesn't mean that because something is not classed as dangerous goods, it is not dangerous. So just bear that in mind. For example, a tanker load of milk. We drink milk. It's inert. But if a tanker load of milk goes over and lands up in a river, it can kill the fish in that river because it changes the pH of that water, and it can kill the fish in that. So it's not dangerous to humans. It is dangerous to the environment, but it's not classed as dangerous goods. So just bear that in mind. It's not because it's not classed doesn't mean it hasn't got some form of hazard. So the other terminology that comes through is we've got hazardous and low hazard. Notice I say low hazard because almost everything has some form of hazard. So we can't say it's non-hazardous, but it may be a low hazard. This definition that I've just read out basically comes out of the European standards. We talk about the United Nations Orange Book, but it's United Nations standard on the transport of dangerous goods. It's got an orange cover, so it's easier just to call it the United Nations Orange Book. This definition comes out of there, and it's in our definition as well, in our legislation as well. If I could get my screen to change. Okay. So the International Transport of Dangerous Goods legislation, this is what I've just mentioned now. It's a UN recommendation on the transportation of dangerous goods, or they're recommendations. You'll notice it says UN recommendations, and then later on it talks about model regulations, which are used for the most regional, national, and international regulatory schemes. They are model. So South Africa has taken parts of this legislation out of the UN model regulations, and I'll talk about the ADR shortly, and put those into our South African legislation. So the Orange Book or the UN recommendations are not law, but they can be taken into law by the countries that are using them. And one of the reasons why this legislation came into being, the United Nations took ownership, is if you look at Europe, which extends from the UK, which used to be part of the EU, but not any longer, but is still from the EU, from the UK, from England, Scotland, Wales, right across through Germany, right through into Russia, and now into China and those countries as well. So because of the transport across those European countries that talk different languages, etc., there had to be a common law that so that you could move freely from one country to another without having to change all sorts of documentation, placarding on your vehicles, etc. So that's where it came out, where this originated from. And as Africa, we are busy with the where they're trying to introduce a similar system right across Africa, and I sit on one of the committees that are doing that, having that discussion as well. But that's something for another session. Then, so you've got the UN model regulations. Then we've also got the European Agreement concerning the international carriage of dangerous goods, which is the ADR. But it's carriage of dangerous goods by road specifically. And the ADR is a French term. I'm not going to pronounce it now, but it's short for the for transport by road. So we've also adopted portions of that. Then there's the international carriage of dangerous goods by rail, which is commonly known as RID. Again, our rail legislation has incorporated some of those requirements as well. Then, as I mentioned earlier, the Europeans, there's a lot of canals and waterways and large rivers in Europe. So they have carriage of dangerous goods by inland waterway. And then there's the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, Transport of Dangerous Goods by Air, which South Africa is a party to. So anything that is going onto an aeroplane to or from South Africa that is considered classed as dangerous goods have to comply with the air requirements, as well as the International Marine Organization, which is known as the IMDG code, International Marine Dangerous Goods Code. So anything that gets loaded onto a ship or loaded off a ship has to comply with those requirements. So it's the whole supply chain basically that is covered by some form of legislation, and all that legislation really interlinks with each other so that goods can move seamlessly across the supply chain and not have to get held up and for change of documentation, marking, and that type of thing. So then we get to South Africa. As I mentioned just now, this national dangerous goods transport legislation resides under the Department of Transport and is governed by the National Road Traffic Act, number 93 of 1996, which prescribes the manner in which dangerous goods may be transported by road. There's also some legislation which falls under the Fire Brigade Services Act. I'm going to just call it Emergency Services Bylaws, and which are compiled under the powers of this act. And this Fire Brigade Services Act governs the flammable, it's in inverted commas, flammable goods permits. Some local authorities talk about dangerous goods permits. There's different terms to that, but I'll explain that in a little bit more detail shortly. Bearing in mind that these two pieces of legislation are not interrelated. One is road, one is fire brigade, but they cover in one way or another the transport of dangerous goods. As I also mentioned earlier, the National Rail Safety Regulator has a standard SANS 10405, which is the transport of dangerous goods by rail. There's a limited quantity of dangerous goods going by rail these days, but it is legislation in place. Excuse me. So the National Road Traffic Act 1993 of 1996, as I said, prescribes the manner in which dangerous goods may be transported by rail. It is specifically Chapter 8 of the Act, which is only 2 or 3 pages, and regulations 273 to 283, which is also only maybe 4 pages. So when people look at it, they say, okay, well, let's look at regulation 273, 283, and it's pretty simple. Well, it appears to be simple. However, within those regulations, there's a reference to incorporated SANS standards. And being incorporated, these SANS, as I mentioned, South African national standards, which are written or compiled by the South African Bureau of Standards, is where the main meat of this legislation lies. So don't just read the regulations, you need to read the applicable SANS standards in relation to dangerous goods. And they can get very, very complicated. But we'll touch on some shortly. For information, I sit on, there's four subcommittees that really write the standards or compile them. I sit on all 4 of those, and I chair two of those standards. So I'm sort of in the forefront of knowing what's going on, and that gives me the ability to help other people in the industry to understand better the requirements. So dangerous goods classifications. The dangerous goods are classified into 9 classes from 1 to 9, and there's various subclasses identifying the various hazards. So those are the 9 classes, starting with explosives, which is class 1. And I must just say, other than class 1, the numbering, so a class 6 for toxic is no less hazardous than a class 2 for gases. So I'm not sure whether it was by chance or by design, but explosives are class 1. So transport of explosives is governed under the transport of dangerous goods legislation. There is then also the local South African legislation, which falls under the South African Police Services, under the Chief Inspector of Explosives. So to transport explosives, you need to comply with the dangerous goods requirements, and you need to comply with the Chief Inspector of Explosives requirements. Class 2 is gases, which is gas tankers, packed gas cylinders, oxyacetylene, any type of gas. Aerosols, down to aerosols, are all classed as gases. So it's a very broad spectrum. Class 3 is flammable liquids, which your main flammable liquids are your petrol, your diesel, aviation fuel, paraffin. Then you get down to your solvents, which go into making of paints and thinners for paint cleaners and inks, and also a large number of products fall under flammable liquids. They probably the most obvious. Next time you stop behind a petrol tanker at the traffic light, have a look at the placard, which will explain to you just now, and it will tell you on that placard that it's transporting flammable liquids. Flammable solids, class 4. Those are products which, as I say, are solid, but can burn, and also not that many transported around, but they are out there. Oxidizers is class 5. Things that some of your fertilizers or fertilizer type products, which go into making explosives, are classed as oxidizers. They are mainly granular in granular products, but there are some liquids as well. Excuse me. Toxic, which is class 6. Toxic is some of your chemicals are toxic. There's a 6.1 is your toxic chemicals. 6.2 is your, and we're all pretty aware of it these days, your medical waste. So all your waste from the hospitals, all your COVID testing, all the protective suits, etc., are classed as toxic. Please switch off your mics. It's very disruptive. Thank you. Then class 7 is your radioactive, which also falls under the nuclear legislation, follows the nuclear legislation very closely, and is also governed by our national nuclear regulator. Corrosives, class 8, which is all your acids and your alkalis, things like caustic soda, which are actually alkalis, are classed as corrosives. So quite a large quantity of corrosives are transported around. And then miscellaneous, class 9, which is a very large classification, and it can include all sorts of other type of products. For example, which was of interest to me, the airbags in your modern motor cars are classed as dangerous goods because they've got I'm going to call it a cartridge in them, which actually inflates the airbag in the event of an impact, and that cartridge is considered as dangerous. But also, if that airbag in transport inflates, it can cause a huge problem because it's, there's they inflated at great pressure and very quickly. So it's so that is considered as miscellaneous as well. So, but at later dates we can go into more detail on all of those. So on the right of my screen, level.
It's I just wanted to comment on that. It's so amazing, Richard. And I'm looking at the classification of dangerous goods and the legislation that really comes with moving all these goods, what we really need to comply with. And it's one of the things that anyone that is in business, anyone that's in logistics must understand the underpinning legislation that is not only for trucking. I think you shared around the IMO and also with IATA as well from the aviation perspective, what is expected. And colleagues, I think it brings that clarity to understand that it's not just about having a tanker to move any of those dangerous goods that has been classified, but there is legislation that you must understand, you need to comply with it as well within the industry. So I'm not sure, colleagues, if you have any comments around that on the chat box. I would really want to hear your view. Did you know that, from your side, what you need to be complying with, and that you can have all the fleet, but the truth is before you move any of those dangerous goods, you really need to classify, you understand them, identify them, make sure that you comply as well. So Richard, I just thought that let me just fresh on this one because it's very, very important that everyone understand the importance of this classification and the danger that comes with all these goods that we are talking about, the commodities that we are talking about.
Well, thank you, Levon. Yeah, it's very true. Don't go out and buy yourself a tanker at great expense and then find, oops, we now have to comply with all this legislation and we want to load at Sasol. Now we have to be squash accredited and. So do your homework first before you jump in and commit yourself. It sounds easy, but as I said, it's not easy. So And the legislation is very, very involved. And it's very, very high risk, both
Yes.
financial risk and risk to other road users, risk to the environment if something goes wrong. So
Indeed.
exactly. Thank you.
And I think the last thing, colleagues, is that what you need to remember is that if you are probably in trucking right now, there's various clients. So most of you have asked the questions that I want to move fuel, I want to move gas, what is expected. Always remember that any of these manufacturers also have got their specific requirements besides what legislation really prescribes for you. So it's very important that you understand what the needs of each and every organization really looking like, and what is it that you need to support to comply with over and above what you are seeing from the legislation perspective. Thank you, Richard. I think you can comment. Colleagues, like I said, please send your notes, send your comments, any questions. I will be reading them and just sharing them with Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebo. So on the right of your screen, you'll see various diamonds. Those are not exactly as we use in South Africa, but I'll go into a little bit explaining those to you shortly. But if you see that, a sign that looks like that, a diamond, either on a package, on a truck, on a box, on a bag, on a drum, whatever it is, have a look at it, because that tells you that it's dangerous goods. So that's your key, and I'll explain a bit more to you now in a bit more detail. So this is just an example of gases. Class 2.1 gases and 2.2. 2.2 are your, let's call it your inert gases, your oxygen, those type of gases. Class 1 are your flammable gases. Acetylene, welding equipment, that type of thing, LPG, propane, let's call them industrial gases, where class 2 are your, I'm going to call them healthcare gases. You'll notice on the diamonds, the 4 diamonds on the left-hand side of the screen have got a diamond. It's got a 2 in the bottom corner, very bottom. It's got a pictogram of a flame, and I'm talking about the top 2, pictogram of a flame. Bottom ones have got a pictogram of a gas cylinder, but there's no writing on those. There's no description. Whereas the ones on the right-hand side of your screen have got a description of flammable gas, non-toxic flammable gas. The difference there is in Europe, they have gone away from any description on the placard, on the diamond. Again, because what I said earlier, they speak lots of different languages, French, German, you name it. They speak it in Europe, and into China. China, Russia have got different writing to let's call it the Europeans. So in South Africa, so the 4 diamonds on the left are what is now being used in Europe, an example of what's being used in Europe, and I use Europe as or let's call it the rest of the world almost, where the ones on the right we are still using in South Africa. But the ones on the left are still accepted as legal in South Africa. So one of the requests that came through to not change, to follow the European standard 100%, is that some of our emergency services are not that well versed in what that flame means or what that bottle means and what does the 2 mean. At least when it says they're flammable gas, they can see, hang on, this is what we're dealing with. So that's over time, I think it'll change, but right now, so there are similar diamonds to that for explosives and oxidizers and all of that, but we'll go into those in more detail at a later stage. So that's really what the diamonds mean. They have different colors for the different classes. I'm not going to tell you what colors they are because I'm colorblind, so I don't want to put my foot into it, but you can still see the pictograms tell you quite clearly what the situation, what it is, and then also what the class. So class 2 is gas. So flammable liquid have a class 3, explosives have a 1, etc., etc. So if I booked myself an air ticket the other day, and if you go and book online, you will actually have to declare that you are not carrying any of these dangerous goods when you book your air ticket, and they show you all these diamonds on the while you're doing your online booking. So it shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but that again shows you that's where your IOTA and your road are linked. So we said just now that dangerous goods are classified into 9 classes, and there are 10 subclasses. So under explosives, there are 3 subclasses. Under gases, there are 2 subclasses. Under flammable liquids, there are no subclasses. So in total, there are, let's call it almost 10 classes. Then another way that dangerous goods are classified, they talk about packing groups. So the class refers to the hazard. So it is flammable or explosive or gas, where the packing group relates to the degree of danger. So the packing group 1, we talk about 1, 2, and 3. Packing group 1 is your most dangerous packing group. So it might be the same product, but it may be a slightly different formulation. So in one formulation, it might be a class 1. In another formulation, it might be a class 3. So that, and it's not the chemists who do the who write up the safety data sheets, which we'll talk about a bit later. They determine where those hazards, which packing group it falls under. There's no specific, A to D is class 1 and E to G is class 2. I mean packing group 2. It comes out of the individual products themselves. So if we go back to our National Road Traffic Act, Chapter 8, we spoke about Regulation 274, and this is very important, which a lot of people don't realize, is that this chapter applies to all vehicles transporting dangerous goods in the Republic of South Africa, and to all other vehicles that are registered in the Republic, whether they are within the Republic or in or on which dangerous goods are being transported. So in short, a vehicle that is coming from Zimbabwe, that is transporting dangerous goods, has to comply with our legislation. There's a bit of an anomaly here because our Road Traffic Act actually stipulates that if a driver in a vehicle is legal to operate in, and I'm going to use the example Zimbabwe, it's also legal to operate in South Africa. So there is a bit of an anomaly here. But generally, the vehicles that come in from our neighboring countries do comply. Their placarding is in place. Their drivers have been trained, etc., etc. So I'm going to use Sasol as an example. If you haven't got all of that in place, you're not going to get into Sasol. Whether you come from South Africa or you come from Zimbabwe, you're not going to get in. So it covers literally every vehicle that transport dangerous goods has to comply with the legislation. And I say when vehicle, it applies to drivers as well. So yeah, so this carries on. It applies to all vehicles on which dangerous goods are transported. So, and vehicles are then, in terms of the National Road Traffic Act, are split into heavy vehicles, which are vehicles with a gross vehicle mass of more than 3,500 kilograms. So gross vehicle mass is the mass of the vehicle with its allowable load. So if you put your vehicle over a weighbridge and it's heavier than 3,500 kilograms, then it's classed as a heavy vehicle. If it's less than 3,500 kilograms, it's classed as a light vehicle. So these are small vehicles, which are less than 3,500 kilogram GVM. So to give you an idea of where the split is, if you take a Mercedes-Benz Sprinter panel van, that is right on the border of being a heavy vehicle or a light vehicle. The new Toyota minibuses, in fact, the Quantum buses, they are now classed as heavy vehicles. So you need to then have at least what we call a Code 10 license. Not that we're going into that, but this comes later to just explain where the difference between a large vehicle and a small vehicle comes in. And then, as I said just now, it also applies to foreign vehicles. In the regulations, Regulation 273, there's a number of definitions. There's the consignor, has certain responsibilities. Consignor is the person that's offering the dangerous goods for transport. The consignee is the person accepting the dangerous goods. The operator is the person responsible for the transporting of the dangerous goods. Then there's also a very critical definition where they talk about the exempt quantity. So the exempt quantity is the quantity of dangerous goods which, if not exceeded in the total load, is exempt from the requirements of the transport of dangerous goods. So this gets pretty complicated, but we'll touch on it for now. There's a standard SANS 10231, which lists all the dangerous goods, and it tells you what the exempt quantity is. So, for example, you can transport 500 liters. Let's get my facts right. 500 liters of petrol in drums on the back of your vehicle. Hang on. 500 liters of petrol on the back of your bakkie without having to comply with the requirements of the transport of dangerous goods. You can transport 1,000 liters of diesel on the back of your bakkie without having to comply with the dangerous goods. You can pull a trailer behind your bakkie with a tanker trailer with 1,000 liters of diesel in it. But if you go to 1,001 liters, you then have to comply. So again, when you're out there looking for transport and somebody offers you some dangerous goods to transport, make sure you know whether you can do it under the exempt quantity or whether it's over the exempt quantity. Because if it's over the exempt quantity, the full compliance is required for the transport of dangerous goods. Under the exempt quantity, no compliance is required, which is a bit of a contentious issue, because if you've got 500 liters of petrol, it's very flammable. It can cause major damage, but from a practical point of view, and I'm going to use the example of a farmer. Farmer goes into town to buy some fuel for his bakkies on the farm and for his tractors. Does he now have to comply with the transport of dangerous goods? In fact, they are exempt in further quantities that they can transport other stuff under the exemption, because to expect every farmer in South Africa to be registered as a dangerous goods transporter is not practical. Then there are mixed loads, which are where there's more than one hazard class of dangerous goods carried together. And there are single loads where there's only one hazard class. So that also creates other issues. A single load would be you only carrying petrol or diesel or paraffin or whatever it might be. A mixed load is you might have petrol and you may have a class, you might have gas or something like that on the same vehicle. And then there's limitations on what you can transport on the same vehicle as well, because some of the products may are not compatible, they may react with each other and create other issues. So remember, though, these are really just we're just scratching the surface here, but it gives you a better idea. Then we spoke earlier about the incorporated standards, which are contained in Regulation 273A. I mentioned earlier, SANS 10228 is identification and classification of dangerous goods. 10229 is the packaging requirements. Remember I said, if you see one of those diamonds on a package, that's covered under 10229. 10231 is your operational requirements. So for a transporter of dangerous goods, this is probably your most critical standard that you need to be aware of and comply with. And there's 10232 Part 1, which is your emergency information, which is what those diamonds must look like, what the placards must look like on the vehicles. They've got specific sizes, colors, information. So that's all covered in 10232 Part 1. 10232 Part 4 is your transport emergency card, which used to be known as a TREM card. A lot of people still talk about the TREM as a TREM card. That's a card which you have to carry on the vehicle, which is a one-page summary of how to deal with emergency, how to fight the fire, how to apply what first aid, whether to evacuate the scene, whatever. And that is generated for each different product that you transport. So if you're transporting a mixed load, you would have to have a transport emergency card for each different class of product that you're transporting. SANS 1518 is the design and construction and maintenance of road vehicles. So the 1518 makes some reference to maintenance. There's also detailed maintenance requirements in 10231 under your operational requirements. So as I said previously, this is where the meat of the dangerous goods legislation sits. It's not in the regulations, it's in the SANS standards. So we touched on your exempt quantities, and as I said, it's exempt quantity if not exceeded, does not have to comply, and it's contained in SANS 10231. Interesting bullet point 3 and 4. They'll talk about 50 liters or 50 kilograms. In fact, they only 500. When they talk about 500, it is either 500 kilograms or 500 liters, even though the products may have a different density. To keep it simple, it's either 1 kilogram or 1 liter. It's the same thing. And it is the net mass or volume of the product or water content, excluding the packaging. So if it's 100 kilograms, it's 100 kilograms of product, not including the packaging, which might be another 10 kilograms or whatever it is. So it's the actual physical product. So things like, a gas cylinder that you might use at home, they talk about a 9 kilogram gas cylinder. That weighs a lot more than 9 kilograms if you try and pick it up. But the content of that cylinder is 9 kilograms. The packaging may be another 5 or 6 kilograms. So don't get confused with that as well. So it's not the gross mass, it's the net mass of the contents that is how you calculate your exempt quantity. We touched on the responsible parties a bit earlier, go into a bit more detail. The consignor can be the product manufacturer, the producer, the owner, the person acting on behalf of the owner, etc., etc. So it gets a bit confusing. So the product manufacturer, and I'm going to use example of Sasol. Sasol manufacture the product. They supply it for transport. It is then transported from the Sasol plant to, say, a warehouse, and is offloaded into that warehouse. When that product arrives at the warehouse manager becomes the consignee because he's receiving that product. But tomorrow, when that product is then put onto another vehicle to go to the end user, he becomes that warehouse manager becomes the consignor. So these, especially with a consignor can be different roles change as further down the supply chain. But the responsibilities stay very much the same. The goods must be correctly classified in terms of SANS 10228. The goods must be correctly packaged in terms of 10229. The loading is to be carried out by a qualified person trained in the relevant procedures. A lot of people miss this. So that forklift operator that picks up that pallet of dangerous goods out of the warehouse and puts it onto the vehicle should be, in terms of the legislation, trained as a qualified person. He needs to know, what does that diamond mean on that pallet of whatever it is that he picks up? What does that diamond mean? Is it flammable liquids? What is he handling? So if something goes wrong, he's got some idea of what to do. So it gets a bit confusing because some people say, well, all drivers must be classified as qualified persons, truck drivers. Not necessarily, because if that driver has other training, which we'll get to now. If that driver does not handle that product, does not physically touch that product, he doesn't have to be trained as a qualified person. But if there's a crew on that vehicle that's offloading those bags of whatever it is, that crew needs to be trained as qualified persons. The driver has to be provided with a signed dangerous goods declaration. The consignor has to provide a dangerous goods declaration specifying where it's being loaded, where it's going, what the products are, what the quantities are, etc., etc. So there's a lot of responsibilities on the consignor. He also has to provide the placards, and the placards are the labels that go onto the vehicle, which we'll talk about shortly. He has to provide those labels and the transport emergency card. They have to be supplied to the operator, or as a minimum, the information has to be provided to the operator so that consignor can say, I'm offering you this load. It's got a UN number. Well, I'll explain that now. UN number 1023 or 1203, for example, and then the transport operator then takes the responsibility to ensure that he's got the correct placards, markings on his vehicle, and the correct transport emergency card, which is quite an expensive exercise, especially if you're transporting different products, different loads, mixed loads. So it can be expensive, and that's why a lot of the consignors will pass that responsibility to the transporter because they don't want to carry that cost. So bear that in mind when you're out there marketing your dangerous goods transport. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but there are different marking requirements on the parcels, on the packages. We'll go into this at a later stage, but there's a South African or SANS standard, there's a United Nations standard, and then the European ADR are slightly different as well. But we won't go into that now. But that is a typical example of a well-marked pallet. You can see through the through the plastic writing at the back. It's aerosol deodorants. So it's classified as a flammable gas. It's a class 2, and it's got a UN number of 1950, which is the international number for aerosols. And that UN number is universal. It's throughout the world, everybody works on the same number. So it doesn't matter in which country, what language you speak. If you refer to 1950, it refers to aerosols. And that's how the UN numbers work. So the operator, that's you, the transporter, must ensure that you have a valid dangerous goods operator card on your vehicle. So when we get to buckies just now, it must be marked as a GD. So if you've got a heavy vehicle that's transporting maize, mealies, just general goods. No, I'm talking on dangerous goods. No, just general goods. It has to be registered as a dangerous goods transport vehicle. So on a heavy vehicle, on a commercial vehicle, you've got a license disc and you've got an operator card. I call it a card, but it's in fact a disc. And on that disc, if you're transporting just normal low hazard goods, you'll have a G on the disc. But if you're transporting dangerous goods, you have to have a D, which means you can transport goods and you can transport dangerous goods on that same vehicle. Or it may just be a D on the disc, which is when you get down to buckies, because buckies don't have to have an operator card, but if they're transporting dangerous goods over the exempt quantity, they have to have a D on the disc. And a lot of people are not sure about that one either. For example, a bucky that's transporting explosives, there is no exempt quantity for explosives, so a bucky that transports explosives has to have a D on the operator disc. Something else which a lot of people don't realize, in terms of our legislation, you must notify all the local authorities, stroke emergency services through which the vehicle will pass on its loaded journey. So if you're traveling from Cape Town to Johannesburg with dangerous goods, you have to notify every municipality on the route that you're transporting dangerous goods through the municipality. Very onerous requirement. And unfortunately, a lot of the local authorities don't know why you're telling them this. And you can't get hold of telephone numbers, you can't get hold of email addresses. So it's a major challenge, which, and now I'm talking my own personal capacity, I think is I hate to say it, but a waste of time. I understand the reasoning behind it is that the municipalities should be able to take all this information, put it together, and say we have X number of vehicles traveling through our municipality on a daily, weekly basis, whatever. Do we have the emergency services, the training, the resources, the equipment to deal with those, with a potential incident? And unfortunately, most of our municipalities don't have that anyway. So it's a bit of a waste of time, but that's my own personal view of the subject, which doesn't go down very well in government circles, but that's a reality. Then the operator needs to make sure that the vehicles are regularly maintained in terms of SANS 10231. I said when we were going through the standards that there's detailed maintenance requirements in SANS 10231. Make sure that your vehicle is maintained and you've got maintenance records. Doesn't help to have your cousin down the road do the service on your vehicle and there's no evidence. There's got to be a job card. There's got to be some form of evidence that you've had your maintenance done. And that's Annex E that is referenced there, goes into detail about what needs to be done. So it's not just an oil change, It's a lot more to it, and it depends on your type of vehicle, but that's where the information is. The driver must undergo driver training. So a commercial vehicle driver for a heavy vehicle, i.e. in excess of 3,500 kilograms, must have a professional driving permit, PRDP. And to be a dangerous goods driver, or to get a PRDPD, professional driving permit dangerous, the driver needs to undergo specific training. And that training must be done on an annual basis by a Department of Transport accredited training provider. So when you're out there looking for a training provider, make sure that they can show you the Department of Transport registration number for their training. There are some training operators out there that offer dangerous goods training, but they are not accredited. So if your vehicle is involved in an accident and the insurer is going to look for some reason to repudiate your claim, and if he picks up that driver is not correctly trained, they may repudiate your claim. So be careful of that. There are a few operators that claim that they're doing the training, but they're not registered. Either they've got to be TITA registered and Department of Transport registered. And this training includes foreign drivers, which goes back to the earlier issue. The Department of Transport there's training available in Botswana, there's training available in Zambia, which complies basically with our legislation. That is acceptable, but drivers from other countries basically, and I think Namibia, they're also accepting. Other countries rather get your driver trained in South Africa if he's a foreign driver, which we won't go into that in this forum. Okay, we spoke about the qualified person. I'm not going to go through that in any more detail, except that person must be appointed in writing. So they must have the training, and there must be a letter saying you have been trained, and that driver that person must accept and say, yes, I have been trained and I accept that I understand the requirements. Consignee is the person accepting the goods. They generally are responsible for the offloading of the dangerous goods, or it's at the offloading point. There, the consignee shall provide the qualified person to carry out the offloading procedures, if it's forklift, for example, or crane or whatever, unless otherwise agreed amongst the responsible parties. So if the crew from the truck is doing the offloading, then the consignee doesn't need to have the qualified persons, but the operator does. We touched on this just now, transport emergency card, which was called the TREM card, now actually called a TREC card, but as I said, a lot of people are still referring to it as the TREM card, which is the original card which we started off with in South Africa, which came out of Europe. So that term has stuck. The dangerous goods declaration we've spoken about, which ultimately comes off the safety data sheet. So any chemical that is produced or sold in South Africa in terms of the Occupational Health and Safety Act needs to have a safety data sheet. So if a client says to you, I want you to transport these dangerous goods for me, you are legally entitled to say, please give me the safety data sheet. Used to be called a MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet. The new terminology now is just a safety data sheet. But that is really, it's a 16 points. It's normally about a 4 or 5 page document, which goes into great detail about the products. And the consignor is to ensure the accuracy of the above documentation. So again, the consignor and the operator need to make sure that what they have is accurate. And this documentation needs to be stored in the designated space on the vehicle. So a designated space is something that looks like that. It doesn't have to be a box. It can be a soft bag. It can be a plastic tube. The construction is not defined, but it has to be the color orange and the words documents in black. And it needs to be clearly, permanently fixed in a clearly visible space in the center of the cab of the vehicle, easily accessible through either door or through a broken front window. So the intention of this, if there's unfortunately an accident, the drivers may be incapacitated, the emergency services, when arriving at that incident, at that vehicle, whether it's lying upside down or whatever, will look for this orange box, because that's where the documentation for that load is in that box. And only the documentation for that specific load is permitted to be in that box. So not yesterday's newspaper and the crossword puzzle and the data my chance numbers and all of that sort of stuff. So quite a mission, because a lot of your new vehicles, especially your heavy vehicles, there's actually not anywhere to mount these document boxes, and you don't want to go and start drilling holes into your 3 million rand Mercedes-Benz Actros. So speak to your vehicle supplier, see how best you can get around this without defacing your vehicle to any degree. This is what a transport emergency card looks like. You're not going to be able to see all the detail, but right in the top corner is your UN number. It's a packing group T2. The product name is calcium carbide. The nature of the danger, the personal protective equipment, actions by the driver, additional actions by the driver, what first aid, supplementary information for emergency services. So a lot of detail on here. This is in fact the older version. I must update it, but the newer version has an issue date and an expiry date, and they expire only has a validity of 3 years. So to recognize it are the red borders. So your transport emergency card, TREM card, whatever you want to call it, is a document with those red borders. And SANS 10232 Part 4 specifies what it must look like and what information must be on the card as well. Under the early legislation, these cards had to be produced by a licensed producers. That has now fallen away. You can produce them yourself, you can print them yourself, provided they meet the requirements as stipulated in 10232 Part 4. There are a number of suppliers in the market, so you can purchase these documents at a reasonable cost. Placarding on the vehicle. Again, I'm just going to go into touch on this. Top left-hand corner of your screen, basically what your placard looks like. The 3286 number, the large number at the top, is the UN number, United Nations number. The number below it is the operator number. So you as the operator, the number there, and the number in the bottom rectangle is your emergency contact number. So companies that are contracted to SASL are allowed to use the SASL emergency number there. If you're not contracted to SASL, you're not permitted to use the SASL number, but you can put your emergency spill response company, Spill Tech or Transit or one of those companies, you can put their numbers in there with their permission. Then the diamond next to it indicates in this instance, the flammable liquid, with being a class 3. It has got I can't think it's a subsidiary risk. It's also a corrosive product, and it's also toxic. So the main hazard is flammable, but it's also corrosive and toxic. So those are what those two small diamonds indicate. So that placard has to be displayed on both sides of the vehicle and on the rear of the vehicle. The height above the ground, etc., is not specified, but it does say they must be clearly visible from the roadside. So if the vehicle is standing on the road and you standing on the road, you must be able to see those. So it can't be down on the chassis somewhere where you can't see it, so it must be clearly displayed. The no smoking, no naked flames, and often the no cell phone labels, those are not dangerous goods requirements per se. They are the municipal fire brigade requirements. So if you want to get a fire permit, they're going to ask to ensure that those are on your vehicle. So those are very quickly what the placards are. So again, the intention of this, vehicle's in an accident, if the emergency services can't get close to the vehicle and they can identify what the UN number is, at least they know that, they can then phone the operator and say, operator, you have a problem, and then they can phone the emergency number and say, we've got a spill, please can you come in and prevent it spilling further, or start cleaning up, or whatever it is. So that's what all of that information means on those placards. So this is a summary of it. I'm not going to go through it all again. What is important is the telephone numbers must be a 24-hour number. So in the old legislation, or previously, it used to say it had to be a landline. One of them had to be a landline number, 24 hours, and one had to be a landline number. But because of changes in technology, etc., it now just says those need to be 24-hour numbers. So it can be a cell phone number, it can be 2 numbers in each block. They specify that they need to be a certain height, but at least one of those numbers needs to be available 24 hours a day for both the operator number and the specialist advice number. So there are many vehicles out on the roads which don't have the correct size placards, correct size numbers, etc. on them. So be aware of that. Those are the placards that you'd use if there's a mixed load. So if it's got more than one UN number on the load, then it would be called a mixed load. The triangle or the diamond has the words dangerous written through it. Otherwise, everything else is the same. And then the bottom example is if it's a single load, it's got one UN number and flammable liquid or flammable gas, whatever it is. This one is aerosols. The other thing, there must be a warning diamond on the front of the vehicle, an orange warning diamond affixed somewhere on the front. It doesn't specify where it must be, but that is also, so from the front of the vehicle, you can see that vehicle is transporting dangerous goods. On those diamonds, if for small vehicles under 3,500 kilograms, all of those placards, diamonds can be half the size. So it doesn't have to be a huge big placard on a bakkie. It is half this, and the standard specifies exactly what those, they are in fact are less than half the size. Level. So you.
Yeah, Richard, I was just going through the chat box and just trying to see what questions are coming your way. I know a lot of, we also have some of the entrepreneurs that has just joined in. Some of them want to start up their businesses onto trucking. Like I said, colleagues, today we're focusing on the dangerous goods. So just about everyone that wants to go into trucking, we have some of our sessions on our live Instagram sessions and also with LinkedIn, whereby we are supporting yourself as an entrepreneur to understand where to start and how to start. I have also posted something on the chat box that if you are in the trucking or you are such or you're a professional that seeks some coaching and mentorship around that, please send your details on the link that has been provided to yourself. However, there's also some questions that I'm seeing coming through in terms of transportation of dangerous goods. The question that has been asked is around what documentation is needed. And then the second question that came is really around the supply chain of LPG gas. And colleagues, I don't want us to go through that today, because today we're looking at the basic legislature, but I'll also allow Richard at the high level just to respond. Remember, colleagues, what we are doing, because this is our first series of dangerous goods, we're giving you the layer, the basic that you need to understand. Now, the next session that will be coming up now, remember there's this classification in terms of commodities. Now we are going to start looking at supply chain of different commodities. And what I am talking about is that we will be talking about fuel, we will be talking about transportation of gas, we will be talking about explosives as well, what you need to be aware of specifically in that. So we will deep dive on those commodities so that you understand when you choosing that, you're buying a tanker for any of those commodities, you need to know what tankers those are, the regulations, the paperwork, the supply chain around it. So Richard, I don't want us to take too much time explaining that, because I think we agreed that we will just at a high level respond, but we will be now on our next session now going on each and every commodity. So I think those are some of the questions that are coming through. I think there was also a question that even for maize, do you have to get a disc, and where will one get at the disc? Is it a traffic department or not? So obviously some of the questions that have been raised is really now looking at various other commodities. And some of the commodities, colleagues, they may not necessarily be dangerous goods, but Richard can give us just a high level response on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, so the documentation generally comes from the traffic department. They the ones that issue the discs. You'd send your vehicle for a roadworthy COF, and when a new vehicle you want it registered as dangerous goods, you have to specify that you want it as registered as dangerous goods. Where then, once you've said you want it as dangerous goods, they're then going to give you your license and then say you now need to go to the fire department to go and get a fire permit or a dangerous goods permit from the fire department, whether it's Johannesburg, Kuruleni, eThekwini, wherever. Then you come back with your permit, and then they will give you your dangerous goods operator card. Where that's written in any legislation, I don't know, but that's what's happening. So the documentation is critical, because if you haven't got that correct documentation, it's not going to work. So we'll go through documentation in some detail at a later session. The mention of LPG supply chain, that is quite a contentious one. We'll also touch on that. There's locally produced LPG and there's imported LPG. And so we'll talk about that. Fuel is a huge subject. Lebo touched on it a little bit earlier. The oil companies themselves, the minimum requirement is your compliance to dangerous goods. The oil companies themselves have, in a lot of instances, far higher standards and requirements as well, with regard to training and vehicle monitoring and tracking and all sorts of stuff. For example, dangerous goods, there's no law to say you have to have tracking on your vehicle in any legislation. But in practice, more and more if you haven't got extremely good tracking on your vehicle, you're doing yourself a disfavor, and your customer is not even going to talk to you. And a lot of the oil companies tell you what tracking must be on the vehicle, and they want access to that tracking as well, so that they can watch your vehicle as you watching it, they're watching it. So the oil companies, especially the majors, the Shells, Total, those companies, Engine, are very, very strict. And then we touched on explosives, which I mentioned earlier. There's the requirements in terms of the Chief Inspector of Explosives, Explosives Act, which regulates what your driving hours, etc., as well. So we've got lots to talk about in going into the future. So I think my presentation is just about done. So I think let's get through with that, and then if there are any other questions, we can try and deal with those. Some of the other requirements on your vehicles is that fire extinguishers need to be fitted as required and maintained. So there needs to be a 1 9-kilogram dry powder on your truck tractor, on the horse, as some people still call it. If you've got a rigid vehicle, so it's just a single vehicle, not a bakkie, a heavy vehicle must have 2 9-kilogram dry powders on the vehicle, and there must be 2 9-kilogram dry powders extinguishers on each trailer. So if you've got a horse and an interlinked trailer, you've got 2 trailers, you must have a total of 5 fire extinguishers on that combination. The smaller vehicles, the bakkies, as we call them in South Africa, can have 1 9-kilogram dry powder or 2 4.5-kilogram dry powders. So if you, in your travels, see a bakkie that's loaded with gas cylinders, there are a number of them out there, have a look, you'll see often they've got their fire extinguishers mounted up sort of above the cab. That's a requirement due to the dangerous goods and for them to get a permit from the fire department. And those fire extinguishers need to be serviced once a year, need to have seals. There's a whole lot of requirements around that as well. The last thing that I've just put up on the screen, trucks transporting low hazard goods do not require fire extinguishers. So there's a certain, what's the term I'm looking for to be polite, enforcement agency that operates in South Africa, especially with vehicles going cross-border, that want to see fire extinguishers on all vehicles. That is not the case. Regulation 260 of the road traffic regulations specifies that a bus must have fire extinguishers. Doesn't say anything about trucks. And then when you go to the dangerous goods legislation, it then tells you what I've just explained to you, that a truck transporting maize meal or building material or something like that does not need a fire extinguisher. So just be aware of that, because there's a bit of money making going on, especially on the N1 just past Pretoria. Then your transport emergency card and your safety data sheet will specify what personal protective equipment is going to be required. So this is just examples: overall, gloves, hard hat, safety boots, reflective vests, eye protection, and depending on the product, a respirator. The consignors, if you're going to go and load at Sasol, they need a specific type of overall, a flame-proof overall. They need specific requirements. So again, there's quite a high expense to get in there. So before you go out and just go and buy some equipment, make sure that it complies with your client or your consignors and your consignees' requirements. And then your vehicles, your heavy vehicles, need to have wheel chocks. And there must be 2 wheel chocks per vehicle, excluding the truck tractor. So if you've got a truck, a horse, and a trailer, you only need 2 wheel chocks for the trailer. You don't need for the truck. But for dangerous goods, it must be made of non-sparking material. So it can be wood, it can be plastic, but it cannot be steel. And again, this only applies to vehicles transporting dangerous goods. It doesn't apply to vehicles transporting low hazard goods. And then we touched on this earlier, municipal bylaws specify, and they vary per municipality, whether it's a flammable substance permit, dangerous goods permit, flammable liquid permit, flammable substance permit. They're generally valid for 12 months, and make sure that the municipality you operate in, or you're going to be, it doesn't have to be your municipality, but ensure that you've got a permit, because a lot of municipalities don't issue these permits. So it's a bit of an anomaly, this. It's only your bigger metros and some of your bigger towns as well, Polokwane and some of the bigger towns have the capacity to issue them, but some of your small towns don't have the capacity to do it. So you may, if you're based in a small town, you may have to go to the nearest big town and say to them, can I get a permit from your fire department? These municipal permits are required, as I said, required by most of the municipalities, but not all of them. And they're not always consistent with other legislation. So the permit might ask for certain things which aren't a requirement in terms of the dangerous goods legislation. But it's a strange thing, but I suppose there's a reason behind it. The Fire Brigade Services Act takes precedent over the Road Traffic Act. So if the fire chief in that town decides he wants the trucks to be painted orange before they come into his town, then that's what you have to do. There's nothing in, so they have high levels of authority. And the argument is if something goes wrong in their town, they're responsible, they land up with a problem to sort it out. So they have a reasonable argument in that way. So yeah, check with your fire chief what is required for your vehicles. One of the other anomalies that hopefully has resolved itself is that the eThekwini municipality and eThekwini fire department would not accept permits from any other municipality in South Africa. So if you had a permit from Johannesburg or Kuruleni and you wanted to go and load in Durban, they could refuse to load you. Your consignor could refuse to load you because you didn't have a eThekwini fire permit. And those permits were only valid for life. So if you got a permit in the first year of that vehicle, 10 years later, that permit is still valid. But that's currently changing. eThekwini have published legislation in August, September last year, changing their bylaws. So they are now coming more in line with the rest of the country. So we as industry, we set up a SANS standard, SANS 1518, to try and standardize the inspection requirements so that municipalities had no reason to not accept other municipal permits. It's slowly coming now, but this has taken us more than 10 years to get to this point. But we're making some progress. So yeah, that's my presentation. I think we're just about spot on time. So as we said earlier, it's really, this is an overview, and we can, as Lebo says, start deep diving into some of the detail, and we'll keep you posted as to what's coming up. And I look forward to being to being with you all again, and I hope you found the session interesting.
Richard, thank you so much for taking your time today. Colleagues, there's a lot of information that we can hear from Richard, and there's more information, more insight that we are all going to learn from him now when we start focusing on various commodities. So far today, we have now focused on what is dangerous goods, understanding the legislation that is driving dangerous goods, understanding the SANS standards. As you can see, I've put on the checkbox what SANS really stands for. The SANS stands South African national standards. It's all under SABS. Remember, we have to comply with certain regulations. Classification of dangerous goods. Richard has shared with us that the dangerous goods are classified from class 1 until class 9. And you need to keep that in your mind when you start thinking around dangerous goods. We spoke around legislation for other modes, and it's so clear, colleagues, that when you're talking about all the modes of transport, as long as you are moving dangerous goods, you are supposed to comply to all the requirements. You may be in maritime, you may be in aviation, all of that is still being prescribed. And there's some context in terms of the National Road Traffic Act, which you must be complying with. And what I love, Richard, as well, is now the questions that I always get in terms of the difference between a consignor, consignee, who is an operator as well, what is being exempted as well in terms of the loads and so forth. Colleagues, that's what Richard has shared with us. Remember, this is part of the transport language. Colleagues, I'm not sure if any of you have got questions, because it's already 2 o'clock looking at my time. I don't mind allowing just 5 minutes for yourself to ask a question. Is there any questions, colleagues? You will be getting a link, by the way, to this discussion on Zoom if you were registered with Zoom, not through Facebook, or if you are logging in through LinkedIn. I know that we will not have your details. So colleagues, please remember, if you are on Facebook or you are on LinkedIn and you need this information, please send your details to mentorship@syncpoint.co.za or mentorship@awiska.org. So we have 5 minutes that I am allowing. Do you have any questions? If you have any questions, please, can you raise your hand? Otherwise, if there's no question, I will close the sessions. Any questions, colleagues? Any area of clarity? I don't see.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Lebo and team.
Wait. Let me see. I didn't see your hand. Who's that? Kosi Etile. Kosi.
Yes, please.
Kosi, welcome. You can ask the question.
2 things. First one is just a comment. Second one will be a question. First one is on local authorities notification. I just wanted to agree in totality with Richard when he said it's really maybe a little outdated now. We should get rid of it. The reason I'm saying that is from experience. I'm dialing in from Botswana, by the way. So I'm sorry, Richard would know that we get 99% of our diesel and petrol from South Africa. So there are a lot of vehicles that are doing the Tarleton Natref route consistently every day. So you can imagine how many of those go through the Northwest Province alone in one day. And if we were to call in every day and say, I have such and such a truck leaving Natref, it will be going through Zeerust at such and such a time. Yeah. How many are doing that? And there are those also that are coming from Natref going to Mafike, they're not even crossing the border. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of vehicles. So really, I think he has a point when he says this one really we should maybe just sweep it under the rug and move on. Now, my question, this session that we just went through, I did something similar back in 2015. I just wanted to sit in on this one to get an appreciation, see if there's been any changes in the industry since the last time I attended. And the one I did lasted 2 days. It had an exam at the end. It was offered by Unitrans here in Botswana. So I just wanted to ask Richard that if, are there going to be, I don't know, an attendance certificate for this one? And if there is, can a BVO present a certificate for attending this session as proof that they have done conveyance of hazardous goods? Because those are requirements at loading terminals. You cannot go in unless you've done this training. So I just wanted to ask him, is there sufficient to pass somebody to actually go load at Tarleton based on attending the session alone?
Okay.
Thank you.
Maybe Richard respond. Richard, maybe let me comment first. Colleagues, one of the things, and Kosi, thank you for your question and for the area of clarity. And one of the things that we do from a Wisconsin point, we are running a lot of mentorship and coaching circles. So what we are bringing, colleagues, is all the experts in the industry, either procurement or logistics, to share the insights. So Richard being one of the experts that we have in the industry sharing insights. So this is not official training that has to be accredited. It's part of our coaching circles, and we do that on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis as well. So my understanding as well is that from the organization perspective, in terms of that is what is required for a driver for the organization in compliance, you need to go through that proper process. And that will speak to the commodities that you are dealing with. So colleagues, so that you understand, we run our coaching circles, and it's not training, it's facilitation, it's coaching, it's mentorship to help, to coach supply chain professionals, to coach transporters out there to understand the industry, because it's one of the things that will allow you to grow within it. So Richard, I think you can proceed on your side and specifically focus on what trainer. I think it's one of the things that you have already flagged in terms of compliance, the legislation, and so forth. So if you can just pick up from that. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Lebo. Yeah, the short answer is no. It doesn't comply. As Lebo said, this is not official training. The 2-day course that you attended at Unitrans is approved. That's one of the training courses that is approved from a foreign country that will get you into NITREF or Tarleton or wherever. Just for interest, I was with Unitrans for 5 days last week doing an audit on them, so I know their training, and it's very good. They run a very good operation. So, but yes, they are accredited in Botswana, but there are other accreditations in South Africa. Technically, your 2-day initial training is 2 days, and then your refresher training is a 1-day course. Some operators will do it all in 1 day, but technically, in terms of the standard, it should be a 2-day course. So Unitrans are doing it correctly. So my recommendations, stick with Unitrans. If you can get the training through them, stay with them. It's your best, probably your best bet in Botswana. I hope that answers your question.
Kosi, I hope you're happy with the response. Don't limit yourself with our sessions. We'll keep on having all these dialogues that will help you, colleagues, deep dive into the dangerous goods, the commodities that I know most of you want to transport. Is there any other questions? I don't see any hand being raised. Let's see, I'm looking at the comments. If there's anything, I can see the thank yous.
Yeah, well, I think are you going to do a summary of the chats, and then we can perhaps respond on some of those?
Yes, I think some of them I was in fact responding to them.
Okay.
I was reading them through whilst you were going through a presentation. Let's see. There's a question in terms of where is the training offered? I'm not sure, Libu, which training are we talking about? Are we talking about the coaching that we are going to do on the commodities? If you can just clarify that. There's a comment on that, or is it probably specific training on transportation of hazardous goods. It's either one of those. If you can just clarify from your side. I can see there's a hand from Saidi Moloto. Saidi, I think you can unmute and ask your question whilst I read some of the questions on the chat box.
Hello, Lebo. Hi, Richard. Just two questions from me. The first one is, are you guys able to send us the presentation that you did today? We've registered via the Zoom session. Is it possible that you can send it through to us, because it was a bit of a much to take in? And also, I missed when Richard was talking about the petrol. I needed to just find out from him that with regards to petrol, what is the limit again? I think you said 500 and then you said 1,000. So I had a misunderstanding there. The petrol that you can load either on a trailer, on a bakkie or whatever, what is the maximum? And also I wanted to just find out, if I have a site and I'm using petrol, right? How much of it can I store on site and it not being underground? I know we're talking about transportation, but it's just something that I thought I should ask. How much of petrol can I store on site, on the site that is not underground, and how much of it can I go around with it?
Okay, so in terms of the exempt quantity, it is 500 liters. The 1,000 liters was for diesel, so petrol is 500 liters. The storage will fall under your local municipality, under your fire brigade. So you'd have to go to the bylaws of your fire brigade, of your town, your city, and see what their legislation is. But it's generally, unless it's in a flammable liquid store, etc., it's going to be very limited quantities, perhaps 50 liters or something like that. But I can't tell you offhand, but it is in the bylaws, and that's where you'll get the information.
Okay, all right, thank you. And in terms of the slide shows the presentation, are you guys able to share it with us?
Deborah, what's your agreement?
Well, normally we do share the presentations with those that are have logged in.
Richard.
Yes, so we will be.
That's fine.
Like I said, colleagues, you will be getting the firstly the link from based on this live session, but you can also get the presentations if it's required.
All right, thank you, Lebo.
You're welcome, Saidi. I've got one last question that we can take, and we will be closing off. Any comments, any questions? Colleagues, I hope that this has been worthwhile, that it's very clear. I know there's a lot to absorb. Please go through it. And like I said, there's a basic that you need to understand, the legislature, what you need to be complying with, and also have a mind of understanding that all of this compliance also comes with money, by the way. So we also get to remember, compliance comes with money. For an organization to be compliant, you have to spend money, because as soon as you start running, then you're going to make money out of that compliance. So put it that way. Understand that for you to get access to opportunities, when you start asking questions all the time, everyone say, I want to go into the fuel industry. What do I need to comply with? I always say compliance, understand it, because you go to any possible client out there, they will ask you, what are you complying with? So start thinking around it, start understanding the SAN standards that are there. Go on the SABS website, you will get all of those. You go under Kaya as well, you will get information, you get the light around what this means. So colleagues, our next session with Richard will be focusing on one of those commodities that we've spoken about. I'm not going to confirm which one, but keep on checking when we're advertising out there, those that whom we have emails, we will share the next session with yourself. We are on Instagram, we are on LinkedIn, we are on Facebook. If you need additional support, we have shared our details. And again, thank you so much to yourself, Richard, for taking time to share your insight with me. I think everyone is learning beyond, hey? And I'm glad that we are deep diving on the core of the industry, because it's one of the industry that's very dangerous, and most people do not understand that compliance really matters when you are talking about dangerous goods. So thank you so much, Richard, for that. I don't know if you have any last comment on your side before I close the session.
No, Lebo, I'd just like to say thank you once again for the opportunity, and it's making me think as well. I know a lot of this stuff, but to put it down and to explain it makes me think, and it's good for me as well. So I'm also learning as we're going along. And thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to all your participants. It's been interesting questions, and see on the chat group some interesting questions. But yeah, we'll go into that detail in further sessions. So thank you.
Indeed. Everyone on LinkedIn, Facebook, thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone for honoring this discussion. I will see you on LinkedIn every Monday, 6:30, on anything and everything around logistics, anything and everything around the procurement environment. Thank you, guys. Wish you all a good day. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers,
Bye.
Lebo. Thank you. Bye-bye.